the Northwest home for paranormal, you're listening to U.S. Phenomenon with your host, Mario Magana.
From the Pacific Northwest in the shadow of the 1962 World's Fair, the Space Needle. Good evening. I'm your host, Mario Magana. This is U.S. Phenomenon. If you haven't been a subscriber to our podcast or video stream, you can do so by going to your favorite podcasting platform. Just search U.S. Phenomenon or go to my website, onairmario.com, to get caught up on the latest video streams. We want to welcome our affiliates across the platform. KOSW, KGRG, KAPY, our flagship station, KVI, and our newest member to the family. It's North Beach Community TV. Tonight, we talk about something that terribly happened just a few weeks ago. Oh, it's almost in a month now, I think. And we're going to talk about the derailment of the train, the Ohio derailment. Our guest tonight, he's been a huge contributor to the show. We bring him in here now. Our guest, Michael Parker. Welcome back to the show, my friend. Welcome.
Thank you, Maury. Thank you for having me back on. Appreciate it.
You know, it's interesting because we go over these circumstances once in a while, and we're like, we have this huge situation. Last time we did one was Trump. I mean, let's be honest. We thought Trump wasn't going to make it, man.
Oh, that was one of our first ever.
That was like
that we did together. I think
we did. That was our second one, but one we did live, which was quite interesting.
Which, for people that are wondering what the hell we're talking, sorry about.
Yes, right.
Heck, we're talking about is that that was the day that he was rushed, I believe, to Bethesda, Maryland, because he had COVID.
Yeah, this was OG COVID, right? This was like back in the day. So again, we're going to talk about the train derailment that happened in Ohio just a few weeks ago on February 3rd, 2023 at 8:55 p.m. Now, Michael, there's so much going on out there right now across all these platforms, Twitch, everyone's got something that's going on. How much have you been staying up on this one?
Quite a bit, because I mean, it's just, I was going to say it's an interesting story. It's a tragic story. And I think this is going to go down as one of the worst American environmental disasters in history. You know, when we look back in the 70s, we talk about Love Canal, Times Beach, 3 Mile Island,
Valdez.
Yeah, the Valdez. I think this is going to go down with those. And the reason I say that is because, I mean, right now, we don't even know just how bad it really is. The EPA, you know, at first they said the air and the water is fine. Now we're coming out with these reports that, no, as any normal person would expect, both the air and the water have numerous issues. And the air, I think, has like, 5 to 9 different elements in them right now.
Right.
So I think, you know, unfortunately for the people of East Palestine, here's something interesting. Is it Palestine or Palestine? I've heard it said both ways in the media.
Yeah.
But for the poor people who live there, and I say poor, not meaning in economics, although they are a middle class type community, I just feel very badly for them. And they have been given a really bad situation that, I'm just going to say it, man. The Biden administration is dropping the ball. The fault of this is on Norfolk Southern and the way they handled things leading up to the derailment. After that, now the problem of cleaning it up and taking care of the city and citizens of Ohio and the United States, in my mind, that falls on the Biden administration, and they have fumbled the ball in an almost criminal sense.
It's crazy because I've heard both sides of the story from both leans in regards to, you know, Biden offering and then, you know, the governor, you know, declining. He just like, I don't need help. Look, regardless of what's going on, I think we need to read in between the lines of what really is going on. And if this is a deregulation situation, are we talking about Like people wake up. Maybe you have some family members that are in Ohio that you want to share some stories with us. We'd love to hear from you this evening. The text line and the phone lines are open this evening. You can do so by calling us at 775-990-5151. Or if you just want to share the text of the story, please do so. You know, the one thing that I, for those who have been under, maybe you don't know what's been going on in regards to maybe you're like, I just don't know. But this is where we come in. This is why I really love doing this show is let's read in between the headline news and get some information that is not always I think we brush off sometimes because we live such a busy life and we're like, yeah, cool. Okay. It didn't happen to me. I'm good. But are you really? I mean, think about all these people. We're talking about Aaron Brockovich is now back into the disaster. We're talking about, to me, this feels like at levels of Chernobyl. Like this land is jacked.
Yes.
I mean,
100%. And we don't know how bad it's going. Now, if you were to look at East Palestine, whatever it is, on a map, this is between Cleveland and Pittsburgh.
Right.
Columbus is not too far away. I mean, Pittsburgh is south of it. And, I don't have a map in front of me looking at all the little
I'm looking one up,
tributaries. But here's the deal. This stuff is in the air. It's in the water. Now it's going to go south with the water into additional communities. And from what I understand, Norfolk Southern created like a little kind of mini dam the other day where they were trying to hold back some of this toxic water, and that got breached, I think, over the weekend. I mean, this thing, the amount of mistakes that have been made by both Norfolk Southern and the government in the response to it, or lack of response to it, is piling up. And when this thing first happened, because you mentioned at the beginning of the show that, this was like a month ago. Yeah, it was a month ago. And that was the 3rd of February. It was on a Friday evening when this happened. And at that point, all we could talk about was Chinese spy balloons, and that was what was dominating the news, was this Chinese spy balloon that was allowed to traipse across America. And we did a show about that. But this thing, when it first happened, people were trying to act like it wasn't such a big deal. And then a journalist goes to investigate it. And for some reason, he gets arrested. And so there was this slow roll on information about just how serious the derailment was. And it's just gotten worse ever since.
What's interesting is we have the map here. For those who are geographically challenged, like myself, looking at this, you're right in the thick of everything here.
Yeah. Youngstown is just above it a little bit. I mean, this is in an area of really major American cities.
I mean, you got Pittsburgh just south, southeast.
Cleveland up north, Columbus, I think, over to the left, to the west, I think. Well, there's Akron. I mean, yeah, but for the people of East Palestine, Ohio, you think about those folks who a month and a half ago, they were living there, minding their own business, doing their jobs, taking care of their kids. Some of them were able to scrape up enough money in the current climate to actually be homeowners. And now the value of their home is just massively depreciated because they are now in a town that's essentially toxic for God knows how long.
I mean, we're talking, I'm going to assume that because of what has happened and has transpired, which we'll take a look at here shortly. We do have some other audio and video that we're going to share. To me, Michael, on all fronts here, what they've done with some of this disaster, toxic waste that they have secured and taken to Texas and put into wells, it's just unbelievable. Now, you would think that in the year, what was that back in the day when what's his name, Conan used to do that in the year 2000, whatever. But you would think that nowadays that we would be smart enough to not put stuff in the ground. I mean, we're shoving this stuff way far past the table. Why would you even remotely take the risk of doing such such things. I mean, it just blows my mind. I was like, what are we doing here? But
cutting corners. And I don't know, because you mentioned the Texas thing, and there was another state, was it Michigan? Because they were taking these substances, wastewater, off to those states. And that part, I have to admit, I haven't looked into deeply, even though Texas is my home state. But I'm like, how in the world did they manage that? From my understanding, I don't believe the states in question were even told that it was coming to them and being dumped there initially.
really, it's interesting because, but again, when we look at those situations, you're looking at, I don't have the map, but I saw this on the map, and I think this was from the Nick Dom kid from TikTok that I'd love for us to share some of this. His scientific, this guy is very knowledgeable. It's not, we're going off the science here, not speculation, and what he's learned, and with his expertise, we're definitely going to get some information here. But what's interesting to me is the map shows some of the states that have gooser wells, and Texas is one of them. But again, when you talk about oil refineries and whatnot in that area, are they putting waste in there from the refineries? That was my question. Why do they have so many of these wells where they're putting trash or waste down into the earth? We're talking past the water table, like so far down. I'm trying to find this video. So if we find it, we'll definitely post it. But
well, I can't speak to that. All I know is that initially when they announced that, I think that there was some pushback from the states in question because they were saying, hold on. And I don't know if this is true or not, but they're saying, hold on. You guys didn't really clear that with us. And I don't remember how that all went down. So maybe we should move on. But I wanted to say something about the train because I was reading about this today.
yes,
And if we would go back to the genesis of the whole thing, because everybody's wondering who was to blame. And at first they wanted to act like there wasn't really such a big deal and they wanted to keep a lid on it. And then as it became more and more apparent in the days after that, this is actually a huge deal. And we've got this almost mushroom looking plume over the city of East Palestine. Now someone has got to be blamed, right? So at first they were saying, well, this is Trump's fault because of the deregulation and all that. Well, come to find out that wasn't exactly true. But I'm going to place the blame squarely on the train company itself, which is the Norfolk Southern Freight Train line. And if I may say, here's some of the things that I found interesting about this train. So the one that derailed consisted of 141 cars, nine of which were empty. Now, this also, I'm looking for the length of this, is 9,300 feet long. Okay, 151 cars, 9,300 feet long. That's a train that's almost 2 miles long, 18,000 tons. And that's a pretty long train from my understanding. And supposedly there had already been issues with that particular train, and employees of Norfolk Southern who did not want to be named at the time said, we were concerned that something was going to happen. And indeed, something did. Now, of those 38 train cars that derailed from this, 11 of those cars had the hazardous material on them. I don't know if there were additional cars in the train that also had more hazardous material, but imagine, okay, you've got 141 cars, 9 empty cars, 38 derail. Of the 38, 11 are the ones that have this really toxic mix of materials. So, people have complained that this is too long of a train. And the reason that you would have a train this long is because shorter trains cost more money and require more people to run it. And Norfolk Southern is pushing back saying, hey, listen, this same train line used to be longer. It used to be a bigger train. A couple of years ago, we dropped it down. All I'm saying is I didn't realize until looking into this, the length and the weight distribution of trains being such an issue. Although when I first read about it, I was like, wow, that's a long train. We'll come to find out that's a really long train, and there were issues related to that, and they should have seen it coming.
And the speculation of how much crew was with the said train before it derailed kind of blows my mind. Really puts us back to them, to the train company, for allowing such
Scant
a
crew.
right, just very,
Yeah.
yeah. What blows my mind about that whole situation too is that could have happened anywhere around across the country. But here's the other thing that I was thinking about too. If we're going to continue to use rail, why are we not investing in great equipment, like reinvesting back in the country? And that really boils back to a situation where we're getting to a politics situation. But for God's sakes, we're all American, right? I mean, we want to invest back in the country. If it's
100%.
rail, if it's turns out to be fiber or whatever to get internet to people's homes who don't have internet, we got to do something that we did back in the day. I don't know if it's like the John F. Kennedy, like, let's go to the moon, whatever, like someone stepping forth and say, you know what, let's reinvest back in our country. Let's get things back to where it needs to be. So we don't have situations like this where now we're talking about cars. We're talking about the earth. We're talking about animals dying. We haven't even touched the surface of this show of what the fallout is going to be of this crash that happened, over a month ago.
It's interesting because I've heard several people say, and it's a good question. It's like, where are the environmentalists on this? When we're all being lectured about CO2, use of so-called fossil fuels, all these various things, plastics, can't have any straws, can't have any plastic bags, but nary a peep. When a company drops an exotic mix of hydrogen chloride and phosgene and ethyl hexyl acrylate. I mean, there were a half a dozen different toxic materials on this train, all dumped on this community, now moving into the water in the surrounding areas. I mean, I don't even know how you argue that, hey, there's not an issue here. The air is okay and the water's okay. I don't know how you make that argument. It would be plain to see, I think, by anyone that these materials are in the surrounding areas. They will soon go downstream. They went up into the atmosphere because you burnt them right off the bat. That was the first thing you did. You had this so-called controlled burn, which then just put more of this material into the atmosphere, which then is going to drop it over God knows how far in the form of literally acid rain.
Right.
I mean, it's ridiculous. It's a tragedy on all fronts.
What's interesting too is we're going to see some fallout. I heard someone talk about where eggs come from, and across the country, Ohio is one of the big producers of eggs. I mean, I'm not getting my eggs. I mean, I think us West Coasters, we get our eggs from local farmers, but if you're in the Midwest, if you're out there, I mean, where are you getting your eggs from? If they said that Ohio is a big contributor to eggs, I'm like, holy smokes, man. Now you're talking about food chain supply issues. What about the fishes and natural resources, deer, all the the livestock that live in this area that are now also a part of this tragic accident, dying left and right, fish just floating to surface. I mean, I've seen so much.
Mm-hmm.
But to really focus back on the science, and I know that we have an entire full show. If someone is watching or listening this evening, and maybe you got a family member that's out there and would love to share a story, we'd love to hear from you this evening. You can do so by giving us a call at 775-990-5151. If you're watching on YouTube, we want to also welcome and thank you for watching us on YouTube or Twitch, which are available on my website as well. You'll be able to watch on onairmario.com. Now, Michael, I know we were going to record this and do the show live a couple, during the weekend or last week. This information is continuously changing, which blows my mind. Now, when you look at this situation versus like a Valdez or Chernobyl or do you think like the dumping of the oil where they had dumped it on the train tracks, now they're digging up and excavating the earth underneath the tracks because of all this train and oil spillage, toxic going into the table there? they're like, yeah, it's fine. And now they're like, oh no, we're scooping this up. And I had an opportunity. I don't know if we want to save this for now or for later, and then we can kind of comment on it about this Nick guy from TikTok. Now, Nick is, as we kind of pull this up here, I came across Nick on TikTok, and I loved his science behind it. He's very well.
People tag me in a lot of videos about East Palestine. And first, I just want to say thank you. I know
I don't know.
For a couple weeks, I've had the assumption that government officials and people from the railroad have been watching my videos. I think it makes a lot of sense, and I'm glad I'm not that person assigned to watching my videos. In a video I made Sunday night, I pointed out that there were some inconsistencies around the numbers that the Ohio EMA were releasing.
What's interesting, Michael, is that this is why this show exists. The inconsistencies we're talking about by
Imagine that.
How would you feel if you lived in East Palestine and now, this gentleman who's a scientist said, hey, look, there's some inconsistencies. What the heck?
I was watching some videos earlier today, and I know it's not supposed to be political, but it is political. And
right.
I was watching some people today, and they were just interviewing various people in the city. And it's almost like this is a microcosm of the United States in 2023, because a portion, logically, of that city is outraged and really upset. They're wondering, are they going to come down in the future with leukemia, with cancer, lung disease, heart disease, God knows what. And then there is a portion of the population who's kind of trusting Norfolk Southern and the government to be doing the right thing. And I'll be honest, like if it was me, I would be one of the people. These are the last people that I'm going to trust to get on the stick and make things right. They are going to slow roll this as long as they can and do the minimum to give the appearance of setting it right. This is gonna go on for years. Decades.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And I don't know when you get to the point where we're all good here, everything's clean, everybody that moved away can come back. Those of you who were too poor and had to stay here, oops, our bad. Apparently, the very first town hall they had, Norfolk Southern would not even show up because they were worried about the safety of their own employees. Then we're like worried, okay, so when is Pete Buttigieg and someone from the Biden administration going to come down here? And the people of that community were asking for that. And the only reason I bring that up, right, not to continue to pick on Biden, but this is just common sense. This is just political common sense. Dude, you need to send somebody there to at least give the impression of being there for the people of that area. So what happens? Trump gets there first. Finally, Buttigieg shows up like a day or two later. It did not go down well. Anyway, all I'm saying is in times like this, as we're sending hundreds of millions, if not billions, out of the country to Ukraine, we need to share the same empathy and compassion and care to our own American cities and our own water table and our own atmosphere here in the continental United States.
Let's listen to the rest of what is this kid's name? Nick Dom. Let's listen to this kid.
And people from the railroad have been watching my videos. I think it makes a lot of sense, and I'm glad I'm not that person assigned to watching my videos. In a video I made Sunday night, I pointed out that there were some inconsistencies around the numbers that the Ohio EMA were releasing. A week ago, they had said that there was 8,300 cubic yards of soil that were removed, and then that number changed to 4,800. And I said, regardless of the reason for this discrepancy, they should account for it. And then on Monday, they said, well, the 4,832 cubic yards that we had said, that is a estimation on visual surveys of the soil. They go on to say that 280 tons of contaminated soil were disposed of by U.S. Ecology in Michigan. We're back down to cubic yards, 28 cubic yards for the soil that was sent to East Liverpool. There are a few issues with this. To start with, by them giving us a precise number, 4,382 cubic yards, we go in with the assumption that they are able to determine how much waste there is, at least down to 2 cubic yards. Otherwise, it would be given as 4,380. But the thing is if this is all a visual estimation, I don't even think that they can estimate down to 10 cubic yards. So they shouldn't be giving us numbers like 4,832. It should either be 4,500 or 5,000. Some people might find this nitpicky, but I do think that this is really important. I also think it's important that they consistently use the same units. We don't know the density of this contaminated soil, so we don't know what 280 tons means. Now, the reason that I think both the railroad and the government really need to focus down on the transparency around their communication is because of the fact that we have caught them in multiple major omissions of information. You can look through my past 3 weeks of videos and see at multiple points I have discovered major omissions that they have only disclosed in later documents, but have also demonstrated. A lot of people are tagging me in a lot of videos about the
Not sure what,
a lot of people are tagging me
why
in a lot
that
of
continues to skip, but interesting, right? When we look at all this, the omission,
Mario, imagine if you're a citizen of East Palestine and I tell you we're doing a visual estimation. What, from a helicopter? What, from ground level? I mean, visual. Shouldn't you go out there with test kits of some kind and just start estimating the damage, moving for, maybe they are, but calling it visual, that does not invoke confidence.
that doesn't make me feel warm and fuzzy at all.
No,
I mean,
no.
You would think, let's just talk about Exxon Valdez, because we're talking oil in the water.
Yeah.
We're talking about this massive train derailment. And now what they're talking about is the concentration of this. You would think you would be able to, you're like, okay, yes, we know how far we need to go out.
Right.
This land's a little easier than water. Maybe water's easier because you can just sheen it through. But I remember back in the day being a kid, that was pretty ugly back in those days. That Valdez spill. I mean, lots of wildlife passed away. Very sad. A lot of Dove soap or a lot of soap used to save whatever animals that they were able to save at that point in time. But I don't know that that's going to be the case here for a lot of these animals drinking the contaminated water from the water table. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, I don't,
the Exxon Valdez, terrible disaster. But at least with oil, you can see it. So, roughly how far it's going, because visually you can actually see the oil and the contamination. And from there, you can begin to create some kind of an effort to then clean that up. But with these materials, okay, you got vinyl chloride, you've got ethylene glycol monobutyl ether, you got isobutylene, combustible liquids, benzene, things changing into phosgene. I mean, and these are incredible. Some of these are incredibly toxic at really minimal amounts, because I think that OSHA had at one point on the was it vinyl chloride or the thing that it turns into? Anyway, it was like 1 part per million.
Right.
So what I'm saying is this presents, in my opinion, as a layman, I think this presents a completely different set of challenges than the Valdez, neither one of them being a good situation. But I think in some ways this is even more difficult, because you're trying to figure out where all of this went and what it changed into, and then wind patterns and cloud patterns, and it changed into this and then went over there. It's, it's bad.
And again, going through and looking at here's some photos. I mean, for those of you who are like, wait a minute, here's some photos. If you're listening to us on the radio experience, thank you. You can always go back to our website, onairmario.com, to watch the stream. It's free. Just go ahead and click on the main. You'll see it right there on the main page, and you can watch the show as well, or you can download the podcast as well. To me, this situation of the smoke and everything, man, I don't know, man. I think that I feel for these individuals who are living in this town, living here, who, from my understanding, it is a very thin line. And someone like an activist like an Aaron Brockovich going to this town to be able to help represent them, to make sure that these families are taken care of. Again, we're talking now possibly a generation of individuals who aren't going to be able to have, who are the unknown. Now their whole lives have been completely changed because the recklessness of a train company trying to save money.
Yep.
And this is what we need to remember, folks. Regardless if you're in East Palestine, maybe you're in LA, maybe you're traveling, maybe you have family somewhere else. Regardless on your politics, man, get it together, man. We got to reinvest in this country. We got to make sure we are, during these times that we're, and I'm not trying to be political, but we need to do the right thing for this country and stop being so damn divided.
Well, the deal with infrastructure, we've been talking about this for a long time. And I mean, it seems like every administration says, we're going to reinvest in infrastructure. And listen, I'm pro rail. We cannot do without rail. So I don't want to criticize the railroad industry. We need it. Earlier, you were pointing to something that gets even more insidious, which is when you take this in context with other things like shortages induced by like the egg situation, or when you have a sudden oil refinery, or you have a baby food shortage because of a bacteria being discovered supposedly in one of the manufacturers. All of this, if we wanted to be total conspiracy theorists, we might say, well, gosh, it almost seems like the supply chains and the things that we need for everyday survival, like food and fuel, are being trimmed down. What does that mean? And not only that, then our environment is being broken down as well. So I'm not saying that I know this is being done intentionally, but I mean, I do have my suspicions that surely this isn't all just complete incompetence. Are we truly living in an idiocracy? And like the Peter Principle, we all rise to our own level of incompetence. I mean, is that what's happening? I don't know.
I mean, it could be. I mean, really could be. I mean, it could be a ton of things.
Right.
I don't know. How about this? Let me see if I can get this back in here. Let's see if we get this. Let's see if we can get this to play here. There we go. Look at that. If you're watching, we're the fire, the smoke, the plume. It just blows my mind on how this was even allowed to transpire. To contain such thing. I guess in a situation like this, they're like, this is the best thing. Is it the evidence that they were trying to get rid of, Michael?
Listen, I don't know how railroad companies typically address these types of accidents, which then results in the burning of these and creating a trench, draining some of the fluid out. And my understanding is that of these 38 train cars, I believe which compound was it? Was it the vinyl chloride?
Yes.
Apparently, boils at 8 degrees Fahrenheit, which is an incredible idea. So we transport it in a liquid form. We then, I think, poke holes in those particular cars, drain it into a trench, and then set it on fire. I mean, it just seems to me like this is a major issue, and somebody needs to hold up their hand, whether it is the governor, DeWine, whether it's Norfolk Southern, whether it is, I don't know who it is, but somebody say, look, we got a major, major problem here in this town of East Palestine, which happens to be between major Cleveland and Pittsburgh, and we need some help here. But no, instead they go in and they burn it. I don't know.
I think the one thing that while you were talking about that, I was pulling up the train car. I was trying to find the tanker so that we could look at the tank, where the tanks themselves have the opportunity to vent themselves up at the top. of most. If you're listening on the radio experience, the black tankers that you see, on the tracks, they have a vent. So if something happens to said tank, they're able to vent if there's some extra pressure. So that they just like a pressure cooker, just be able to, create sound effects. Those are courtesy of the radio show. Thank you. But again, to be able to release it, the pressure that was there. Obviously, that's what those tanks are for. But again, if they were under so much pressure, they're like, well, these things are gonna. If they were to explode, the shrapnel from those tanks would have been wild.
Again, I don't have the answer how they should have handled it, but it seems like draining it off and burning it probably. I don't know. I think we're experts. Don't if there's any silver lining to this, is perhaps it has brought attention to the whole issue of train derailment. And in the early days, part of the copium on this was like, hey, man, you probably didn't know it, but we have thousands of train derailments every year, and you're only hearing about this one because right now it's, this is what's in the news. All right. Well, I didn't know there were that many train derailments on an annual basis. However, I would say that to try to act like, well, because we have a lot of them and you never heard about them, that somehow this is okay and we should alleviate people's fears. I would say, let's take the opportunity to completely reevaluate the situation. And I would first offer that if a train company is transporting these types of materials, these types of substances, then maybe that should be a different type of train as far as how many cars and what the weight maintenance on that. Does that make sense, Mario? Yeah. I mean, have a smaller train. If this is an issue going forward and we need to have some regulation, if you want to have a regulation, let's start with what's the most dangerous thing.
100%. What I'm hearing from you, you're saying, okay, so let's say we have said we're going to go from here to wherever the case may be. Maybe it's from here to, to LA, and we're going to do 100 cars and we're going to carry all the same materials, right? Now, on the said train to LA, what we're going to do is we're going to have a conductor, we're going to have an observer, we're going to have what should be the correct amount of infrastructure in place to get from Seattle to LA, if that's the case, where we have enough crew to obviously operate the train, to obviously maintain systems to make sure that we have the correct weight distribution, the right braking systems. But that also goes back to the entire rail system across the entire United States, making sure that everything is on point. Not that we're saying that this is, that there might be a lack of infrastructure. Maybe it's just tired infrastructure. Maybe it's time to do a little bit of, and maybe some of it has been upgraded. We don't know these stories. And yes, there are automatic intersections in the train system cars now, where trains go from here to blah, blah, blah. And, there's traffic, there's sensors everywhere, but to make sure that the industrial side of it hasn't taken a kickback or a lean. I don't want to refer to a kickback, but like a step back where like, oh yeah, everything's cool. We get to do it our own way. Back in the 70s, we're like, hey, no, let's get it up to snuff. If that's the case, I'm sure they are a part of these situations where they are up to some type of code. But if there is deregulation going on, maybe it's time to tighten the batten down the hatches a little bit.
Well, I believe that over the weekend there was another train derailment, and
imagine that.
Did you hear about this?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, so they just had another one, and it's same company, and this one also in Ohio. So listen, I'm not typically like a huge guy who's pro regulation, but I would say if you've got a company that's having this many issues of this kind, well, let's take those guys and let's go talk to them for a minute and sort their issues out. Maybe it's just bad luck, but maybe they're really cutting corners and not doing their job in the correct fashion. I don't know, but it's certainly suspect.
I mean, let's be honest. Okay, so they had a second one. There was no hazardous material on this one. This one was in Springfield, Ohio. I don't know. Something's going on.
That would have had 212 cars, apparently. And so these are really, really long trains. And
I'm going to say that I believe maybe the train company was in North Fork.
Yep.
Maybe needs to be looked at by the NTSB and say, hey, you know what? And maybe this is where the government needs to slap a big ass fine on these guys. Say, hey, look, man, you guys aren't doing this right. And regardless, if your inconsistency, I mean, this goes back to a lot of natural disasters, and this one may be more not natural, but more of a what do we want to call it? I don't want to call it a natural disaster, but what the word
it's an environmental disaster.
This is true, but like a natural disaster where you have like a hurricane coming through a city versus, these things need to be looked at by the NTSB. If it's FEMA doing their job, well, that's a whole nother ball game, but that's for another show for another date. FEMA.
So let's talk about some of the weirdness also, because you and I talked about this in the first couple of weeks of it. And at that point we couldn't do a show, but there was also, I've intended to watch this and I still haven't, but there's this film called White Noise that I believe was actually partially shot in that area about a train derailment. And some of the people in East Palestine who acted as the extras in that film are now some of the people affected in this situation, which has occurred in real life.
Crazy, because it is on Netflix. You can watch it. I had a chance to watch some of it, and then I just kind of like tuned out, and I was like,
is it any good? That's a no.
I'm a tough critic when it comes to these things. Yeah. I mean, I'm still trying to get to go see Creed 3.
Right.
Which is terrible, because I'm like, why am I going to watch Creed 3? But then again, I'm a Rocky fan, but that's
good enough. That's a good enough answer.
So I wasn't a fan. I watched it. I think it was a little dry, a little corny for me. It takes a lot for me to like jump in. Like 1883, I'm in. I'm watching that right now. That's my thing right now. I'm watching that. So trying to catch up on that. So for those who are, I find it the White Noise, I was like, dang, that the storyline is too close to what we're going, what these people are now dealing with. Although when you talk about the water table, the catastrophe that once now has happened, and we're talking month in plus, or just over a month now and some change. I don't know, Michael, that I don't know what to do right to these individuals. It's almost like I'm just going to say it, cut them a blank check, buy the house, Northfolk, the train company, buy out these homes. And then, you're going to have to turn it into a monument of some flavor, because that area is a war zone, an industrial war zone now, because of the industrial hazard that has ensued. I mean, that whole area within, I don't care how many miles, but it's jacked. There's no way that area is going to be good for a good 100, 200 years. That's my guess. And that's just, I'm throwing that out there. And look at landfills and things of that nature.
I'm trying to find out what the population of this town is, because I was thinking it was around 5,000. Okay, here we go. The population is 4,761. That's as of 2020.
And I wonder what does it also say what the medium income level is there at that? No.
I'm looking for it, but I'm pretty sure that this is a very middle class, I think probably largely just Caucasian, just run of the mill people that are not going to get any special considerations. unfortunately. And I've heard arguments, people saying, well, you know what, if this was in some different community, there would have been assistance quicker and more effective. But these are just middle class people somewhere in Ohio in a small semi-rural community. And now, yeah, they're stuck with property values that are going to just descend. Those who had the money to be paying on a home. And then there are those who don't have the money to leave or have nowhere else to go. So when you've got less than 5,000 people, could this train company make payments to all of the citizens of East Palestine? The question then becomes, well, what, I might raise my hand and be outside of East Palestine, on the outskirts or whatever, and say, well, what about me? I agree with you
Right. With
that I would like to see some kind of payments being made to these people. On the other hand, it's going to be hard to decide who would get that and who wouldn't. But
well,
I think they deserve something for sure.
So the median, the household, household income is roughly around $46,000.
Yep.
House goes for roughly around $88,000 in that area, East Palestine. So,
you know what? I hate to say it, Norfolk Southern, you're getting a bargain here. This could have been somewhere else, and those house prices would have been a lot more. So maybe you need to man up and buy these properties.
Right. But again, I would say maybe that's where Brockovich comes into a situation and says, okay, here's the blast zone. Between this is the red zone. This is the blast zone. This is where the most contaminations happen. Here's what we have to do. And then outside of those rings, it continues, but it changes. The percentage changes at that point in time. And let's say you're outside of the blast zone and you're in an outskirts of the zone where you may have been affected by, the contaminants in the air from downstream. So then you would get a percentage of the cut from the train derailment. That's my thought.
Mm-hmm. No, and she was just there. I watched her over the weekend. She was speaking to reporters, and she was saying that, she is overwhelmed by the situation. And she was telling stories to reporters about what the people of the town were saying. And they're wondering, what do I do now? What's going to happen to me? What's going to happen to my family? We can't move. We're stuck here. My property values have sunk. Now I'm worried about all the various, jobs, and speaking of jobs, I was also watching a meeting where the mayor of East Palestine, he lost his cool at a city meeting. I don't really blame the guy. I mean, because he's getting it as well. Like, I'm not taking up for the guy or villainizing the guy, but like the guy, he's clearly overwhelmed. He made one comment I thought that was a little odd. He was saying, hey, I'm a part-time mayor. I mean, this is my part-time job. I've got a real job. I don't know if that was the right thing to say, but everyone involved in this on the local level, they're tapped out, I would think, at this time. And Aaron Brockovich was speaking to that.
Don't you think at this point in time, either the governor or the federal government should have stepped in at that point? If this town, it runs off a part-time platform where the federal government should be able to, but again, then it boils back to the government meddling in certain local governments. So that's where local government has to declare a natural disaster for the federal government to step in. So look, politics aside, let's just not cut the BS and let's just get to some type of, and that's where we're talking about, whose hands got what out, who's getting, slicked down with, X amount of dollars. I'm not saying that's what's going on, but look, people, remember these types of things, and regardless on if it's a natural disaster, industrial disaster like this one here, do your homework, read in between the lines. Is the government working for you because you have elected these individuals? Not trying to be a parapolitics show, but in this one here, read through the lines, my friends.
I believe at the beginning of this, people were saying that the governor of Ohio was not calling for it to be declared an emergency.
That's
and if that's the case, I would ask why. I mean, this is clearly an emergency, is it not? I mean,
You would
you've
think
dumped
so.
a half dozen toxic materials in a town that leads to numerous tributaries that then feed the Mississippi River and other rivers. I mean, that's pretty obviously to me a major disaster. So that part I do not understand why you would even wait to do that.
I just think on a lot of levels that this is the reason why these types of shows exist out there right now, Michael. I mean, from us to hundreds of other conspiracy shows to parapolitics shows that are out here trying to get the federal government or the government to just do the right thing. I'm not saying that they're not going to, but just be consistent in what you're doing, regardless on what side of the fence you may live on or land on. These types of things, even from the audio we heard from Nick Dom from TikTok, was able to show the relevance of how the inconsistencies are happening. Either it's mistakes because of long hours being worked, or it's the federal government saying, look, okay, we messed up, or the EPA or whoever, the local EPA. Everyone's trying to cover something up, but does the train company have their pockets lined? Is that what may be also going on as well?
Well, I think is the government covering for them? I don't know. At the end of the day, all I would say is this: it's like there is a community that is in crisis, and the extent of that crisis, downstream, upwind, both ways, in a state with major cities in it. I mean, to me, it's just if there's ever a time for the government to move in and say, look, it's time for us to step in now. In the future, you may have to pay for all of this, Norfolk Southern, but right now we can't worry about who's paying for it. We just need to do something about it. We need to take care of the people who live here and sort that out, and then we'll assign billing in the future.
Interesting. As we're talking, a text comes into the text line at 775-990-5151. Sharon, who is watching on, she says, not TikTok, I'm sorry, but what is that dumb? Twitch, thank you. Said she's watching she lives here in Washington State, said that her family, she has a grandmother and that is going to be leaving the area and coming up here for treatment, just to make sure. And she's going to move up here, is what she's saying. Going to move up to the Northwest to get out of. I mean, if people have family members that can help out, this is like, that would be huge and key. But not everyone's retired. You know, obviously someone's grandmother who lives out there is able to go up here to the Northwest. But what about like the working class individuals like you and myself who have real jobs, or we pretend to have real jobs, or people that are out there who are working still are in limbo? It just blows my mind.
So Mario, check this out. And what I'm about to say, this has been advised by several people that I follow, and I think this is important. Forgive me, public, if you've already heard this, but if you live in East Palestine, or in the surrounding areas, you would be well served, if you have not already, to go get a full medical checkup so that we can establish a baseline for where you are at right now versus where you may be in the future when you suddenly have skin lesions or difficulty in breathing or lost mental capacity or whatever it is. Because, and also don't sign anything. Don't take any money from Norfolk Southern. Don't sign any papers right now that will allow them to not help you in the future. And that's probably common sense for most people, but it goes without saying. And for those who don't, and also, if you had elderly people, elderly family, or young children in that area, and you had a way to take them out of the county, out of state, to family elsewhere, I would probably have to do it. Or I would probably do it so that they could be in a cleaner, safer environment. And then back to your original point, but then somebody has to stick around and mind the store, right? So not everybody economically could leave, and you can't just desert the town. So, man, they have a world of trouble, unfortunately. And my heart goes out to the people of East Palestine.
It's really a rock and a hard place.
Yep.
Really, to be honest with you.
Yep.
I mean, a rock and a hard place. You're talking about a town, small economic town, industrial. I mean, we're talking. I mean, these folks' homes at 88,000 roughly, down to who knows what, and how that changes everything. I feel, yes, again, my heart goes out to these families that were just living life.
Yep.
And then on February 3rd, their lives all changed.
Yep. And so we'll have to see now if there are any changes, because I admit I did not know that train derailments happened with the frequency that they did. And apparently a lot of them happened, but not major derailments. So, but it does seem like in the immediate aftermath of that, we were hearing about some factories blowing up, another derailment, I believe, in Arizona. I mean, it just seems like this is the season of derailments and factory explosions and continued supply chain disruptions. And I think there was another egg issue the other day and I think we talked about this earlier, the baby food thing. I mean, it's almost a Monty Python movie if Monty Python was American making satire in the 2020s.
Wild on how we get things done around here. Michael, it's always a pleasure to have you come on. I know we're getting close to the end of the show. If you're one of our affiliates, even our TV, our new local TV station out of down in Ocean Shores and Seabrook area, they checking us out at North Beach Community TV, which is lovely to have those individuals. Thank you for coming to hang out with us this evening. Again, Michael Parker, thank you for hanging out with us. They can find you on your Insta.
I'm on Twitter at Michael Parker LA. So that's the best place. Like, hit me up, man. Ask me a question or tell me what I'm wrong about or whatever. Let's talk on it.
Right. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast and you missed some of this, you can go back and watch the stream or download the podcast on your favorite podcasting platform. Just search US Phenomenon, or you can go to my website, onairmario.com, and we'll have the entire show available for you to stream and watch. I want to thank all of our affiliates, KOSW, KGRG, KAPY, our flagship station, KVI, and our newest family member, North Beach Community TV. Thank you on behalf of myself, Michael Parker, Sophia Magana, Mark Christopher, Jeff Jens, my entire staff. I'd like to say good night. And thank you again for taking the time to watch and stream us on YouTube and Twitch TV. So thank you again, and good night.